So now let's talk about how do we actually map these activity systems or these maps of systems of interconnected choices. There are lots of processes that we can follow. Here's a process that I personally like to do. We first might start out by thinking about what are some overarching positioning choices, what are maybe some core choices that a firm has made. Let's have some hypotheses about those and put them first on our map. So we've talked about Trader Joe's, maybe friendly service is an important one, maybe everyday low pricing is another one. So we have some idea of what are maybe some of the core overarching strategic positioning choices that a firm has made. Then we need to do that value chain analysis that we've done before. We need to really ask what are all the activities that the firm is engaged in various pieces of their value chain, and let's particularly focus on those that are distinctive for that particular firm. So those will become sort of these smaller bubbles on our activity map. Next question is, how consistent are these various activity choices with the overarching positioning? So we think about all of these different smaller activity choices and ask, are they consistent with the overarching choices, or are they inconsistent? And we might want to capture those maybe with a dotted line if you wish. So after we've done that, then we really ask this question around these interdependencies. Are actually two activities mutually reinforcing? And really the idea here is that if we have activity A and if we have activity B, we ask, what's the value of activity A? And is it enhanced because we also engage in activity B? And if that is the case, then indeed we can sort of draw a line between A and B. So we continue doing this for all of the different activity choices that we have on our map. And then we sort of step back a little bit and we ask, okay, which of these choices seem to be very central or core? Now, graphically that means which of these choices have lots of lines coming out of them, which would imply that if we were to change that particular activity, the value of lots of other activities would be affected, or we would have to recalibrate and readjust lots of other activities. So if we step back and here, we are saying, look, yes, this seems very central, this seems very central. This one here, which we thought was actually a central activity, is maybe not quite such a central choice. And so in version 2.0, when we redo this, we might actually want to kind of demote this particular activity to a smaller bubble. Whereas this activity here, which when we started out, we didn't think about it as being something central and core, actually turns out to be fairly central and core. So maybe we actually want to bump that up to a larger circle. So that's why I would say when you start this process, don't spend too much time debating whether something is a large circle or a small circle. In some sense, the analysis should tell you what it is, but it's sometimes helpful to start out with some hypotheses of what are sort of core choices, and then later kind of to come back, maybe redraw the system, redraw the map, and we have really identified which elements are core and central and which ones are more sort of peripheral or supporting of the various core choices. So it's a bit of an iterative process, but hopefully that will give you some idea of how to engage in the mapping of an activity system. So now let me just walk you through a very quick example of this process of mapping a firm's activity system. We've just talked about it sort of in general terms. Let's pick Vanguard again. Vanguard, one of the largest asset managers in terms of mutual funds in the world, actually. So when you study that firm and you ask yourself, so what are some of the overarching positioning choices that this firm has made? The first thing that maybe comes to mind is that they really focus on low cost. Second thing is that they focus on more conservatively managed funds. The third one is that they have sort of usually an outlook for the longer term perspective. Long-term performance is really what they're worried about. And the fourth one, which maybe we immediately identify, is they have a very different organizational structure. Unlike other firms, they are actually a mutual structure where the fund shareholders also own the asset manager. So this might be our first step of some of the overarching themes. Then, in the second step, again, we would think about what is Vanguard's value chain. And again, we'll ask what is sort of the generic value chain for an asset manager or for a mutual fund company, and we can again identify the different rubrics that we've talked about before. It's asset management, account management, etc. So we have all of these different rubrics, and for each of these rubrics now we really want to identify what are the specific activities that Vanguard is engaged in. So just to pick the HR group, it's quite remarkable. Vanguard hires really mainly college graduates. Vanguard doesn't really like to hire from Wall Street because they have a different attitude towards short-term trading. Vanguard has an incentive system that gives bonuses if they reduce the cost for the client. So a number of distinctive activities that they have engaged in. And of course, lastly, we need to think about how are all of these activities interdependent, how do they interact? And so when I did this, yes, I came up with this fairly large system with lots and lots of choices and lots of interdependencies. And there were some surprises. So for instance, direct distribution, which I hadn't identified early on as a key choice, really came out as one of these very central choices where lots of lines were coming out of it. And so as I was iterating on this process, I decided this really had to become one of the core central choices that Vanguard had engaged in. The other thing, as you can see, what I've done in this graph is I tried to color coordinate, put the same color on different stages of the value chain. Again, these systems sometimes become very complex, so whatever we can do to make it a little bit easier to read can be helpful. So sometimes color coding along the different stages along the value chain can be a helpful thing to do.